Yeah, well, and it's very nice to meet you. And as I said, let's have a conversation. So let's not go slide by slide in that sense. But I'm Damiano, and I'm an urbanist. So I don't come from any of your fields, actually, which is good. And I've been working on many different things in the past. So I've been working on kind of let's say cultural analytics, if you want to call it that way. So looking at the metamorphology of cities, which is basically the shape of the city seen through media. And I've been working also on urban planning. So I've co-founded Spin Unit it's more than 11 years ago here in Tallinn, which is a small group that does urban research for ministries and municipalities, mostly. These are our clients. And most recently, UrbanistAI, so January of this year. So it's been not even a year. And the idea was actually that kind of quite many of the clients in Spin Unit, they were wondering like, okay, how do we go from urban research to urban design? How do we do that in a participatory manner? Mm-hmm. So that was sort of kind of the question.
Wait a second. So you were at Nokia Bell Labs and Sapienza University in Rome. That sounds like Vittorio Loreto, etc.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. No, I was basically in Rome, actually. I was in the so-called project centers of architecture. So I graduated, I did my bachelor in Rome. I did my master here in Tallinn.
Okay.
And then I went back to Rome to give it a try. Like, can you actually go back to Rome to do anything? And the answer was kind of, maybe, no, not really.
I tried this year again.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about. I try because kind of a lot of Italian, when they leave, they only complain. But like, so I tried. I went there half a year and I tried, and no, the answer is no. So I came back. But yeah, so fantastic people, of course, working there, but just the system that doesn't really allow for the kind of work that we do. Then yeah, I've been teaching for a couple of years in Beijing, and let's say most of my work, most of my time goes in Tampere, kind of mostly Spin Unit UrbanistAI, and then I have a small hat in Tampere University where I do research on biodiversity. So I think I have a couple of things here. So yes, the main thing we do is to look at the relationship between public health and let's say city form in a way. Kind of the basis of this research is that we've been seeing, one of the first studies was that if we look at the literally blood samples of children, of about 11,000 children across Finland over the course of their life, so from 0 to until they are 18 years old, what we started to see is that children lived in dense urban area, or let's put it the other way around, children that live next to agricultural lands, they were less likely to develop diabetes type 1, asthma, and other things. Then they started to make experiments with the playgrounds of the kids. So they started to basically change the normal sand with turf from the countryside and from the forest. And the children that were playing, so they were kind of different, kind of kindergarten as a control that did nothing, and as other one, they kind of made this transformation. In the kindergartens where the transformation was made, after 30 days, they could already detect a stronger immune system. So then it started, of course, to sprout many different research inquiry, and kind of my job within this team is basically to make somehow classic correlation analysis between the location of children that develop or don't develop certain disease and the type of urban environment in which
on the map
they live. Yes, on the map. But then at the same time, with Spin Unit, we've been doing much more of this kind of stuff. So digital ethnography and social media data analysis. We don't do this. We haven't done that for quite many years now, actually. But we've been basically working quite a bit in trying to look at this metamorphology of the city. So trying to understand what is the shape of the invisible image of the city and trying to map it. So we've been working much less on the analysis of the images in terms of cultural analytics, but a bit more on sort of what activities happens where and when. So that's kind of a sort of and other stuff. But about UrbanistAI, so we formed the team exactly this year in January. So it's kind of quite new. So it's me, Lisa, she does the UI UX. And then there is Luca Stornaiuolo, who actually developed the AI models. And then we have Sampo Roppila, who works with policymakers, and Timo that works on communication. But basically, yeah, we started in January, but it's only because Luca has developed the method over the past couple of years.
Interesting.
So he's been developing these generative AI models already for an architecture biennale in Venice 2 years before. So like he worked on these models for a couple of years.
It's the next biennial,
For the previous one.
Oh, okay.
For actually 2 biennales ago.
Is that the one he did with Mauro Martino, or?
I think Mauro was also there, but Luca was doing this kind of thing called strolling cities.
Yes.
Yeah, so basically he developed this AI model that, given poetry, was basically visualizing urban walks. And when we met, I was like, Luca, like, why don't we use this to reimagine cities based on people's ideas instead of poetry? And that's where the UrbanistAI kind of came.
Okay.
So it was like he did something as an art form. We were having this issue of reimagining the cities with citizens. And then we brought these kind of 2 things together. So basically the most active persons are basically me, Lisa, and Luca. And then Sampo and Timo, they mostly work on the method and they work with clients and they give talks. Basically, they try to kind of create awareness of these topics. Yes, but the overall idea indeed was to enable social imagination. So there has been so much talk about this idea that we need to bring the social imaginary into urban development, and a kind of constant failure, like just impossible to do so. And I started also to wonder, okay, why is this happening? Why there is this divergence between the planning practice and what citizens, and kind of basically why there is a different way in how architects and people make cities, and technology. It's clearly one of the core issue. It's kind of the technology that we use, the means that we use to make cities, and it also shows the issues because architecture offices and planners, they use, of course, nowadays they use CAD, they use GIS, so they're used to plan the city from a rule-based perspective, and most often from a top-down perspective. So they design patterns that make sense from top view, while citizens try to organize activities and work on placemaking from their perspective, so from the kind of a street view level. And that's been kind of why these 2 practices are not converging, and why those people usually don't like each other, is because they speak different languages and they use different medium to speak those languages. So we saw that kind of the main issue seemed to be for us the medium and the language. And then we thought, how can we align those 2 things? So how can we have people that use different technologies and different languages to speak to each other?
Sorry, but I don't really understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Basically, what is my feeling? Like I don't know, maybe very advanced, but regular citizen. Is when I start thinking about how cities organized, what is convenient, what is not, why some things are happening, etc. I systematically find it instructive to look at the map. So if I understand, if I want to understand what's going on, then then it is inevitable that the look from above, when we can see not just to the next street corner, but sort of have a general perspective of what's going on as a whole, it's just simply better. Just simply better.
Absolutely.
So architects are looking at their models from above, not because they are sort of evil people or I don't know, strange people who have some strange hunch of doing it, but because it makes sense. So maybe it is inevitable that we, in order to sort of somehow teach people, well, somehow make the conversation productive, it is inevitable that people need to be taught to look from that perspective. And it is just going back to the street level perspective is just not good because you don't see some things from there.
Right, but that's just. I mean, your argument seemingly is to that this goes both ways, right? Like if you go back one slide, that's the classic sort of Corbusian sort of, point and sort of, what's the English word? Scheibenhochhaus. So you have these sort of like high-rise buildings that are either sort of like these rectangle boxes or they're like pointy square things. And there is no such life going on, even though there is probably life like that going on, but you can see it and the architect doesn't plan it. So there is stuff that the architect doesn't see and there is stuff that the citizen doesn't see. And of course, the citizen needs to read the map, but what you argue is that the architects have forgotten how this looks like. Is that true?
Yeah, well, it's
and
yes, at least you can look from above, but think about these things. It is okay.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is that I think what is happening to all of us is that when kind of the perspective and the technology that we use to design any object is going to influence the design of the object itself. So what I mean is that if I'm trying to make a master plan of the city from above, I try to make it so that it's kind of somewhat pleasing me as a designer from that perspective. So exactly, I think the reason why you get a lot of city design like that, because indeed it looks good. I mean, I like that model, honestly. I think it's a beautiful model. Like it's like geometrically, it's pleasing. It has something to be like
that's what I see.
the proportions are perfect, like. But when you are walking through that, all you see it's just kind of a wall. Kind of as a person down there, you actually can't see. So that kind of the issue is that, which comes also from Jane Jacobs, that she was one of the first in the 70s, 60s, actually saying that we've lost the human perspective. Exactly, it's because when we start to design from above, we design patterns that look good from above. I make an example, which is quite classic, is kind of circular building, which if you design it from above, like, this is a beautiful form because circles are beautiful. But again, if you're a person standing there, you see the same things.
Yeah, you have no idea that
A straight wall. You don't.
To the next slide.
Yes.
Perfect example. What you see to the left, it's a very Jane Jacobs picture, right?
Yeah.
So this is like what you would see when you're, in this case, Chinatown, New York or something, right? Or even, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So this gives you a certain experience, which is undeducible from the center picture.
I'm sure that it is undeducible. You need to work properly on that let's say. I mean, you can look at this circle, and if you think about it properly, looking from above, you can imagine how it looks.
But this is great conversation because
you need to think about it.
Yes, because you can do it if you're trained to do so.
Yeah.
But as a citizen, like if you're exactly, that's my point. It's a question of language, because indeed, you as an architect, you are supposed to understand this.
Mm-hmm.
But then as a citizen, it becomes very difficult to interpret a drawing and try to imagine how would it feel like in the future. So what we started to see is that whenever there will be architecture competitions and they would kind of put online the renderings and say, okay, which one you like, which one you don't, like people had very kind of a lot of difficulties in telling, even if they like or not, because it's just hard for them to interpret that image. Because both the technology used to produce them and also the views are not the ones that they can experience. Most renderings are done usually kind of like, axonometries, which is like, but as a human, you're not used to look at the city that way. So it's very difficult for a person who is not trained to understand even how many floors is that, kind of how would it feel like. Mm-hmm. And there has been a lot of discourse of bringing in VR and AR into that. But that becomes a very personal experience. Mm-hmm. So what we wanted to try to do is to make co-design a group experience. So something that people could do together, because it's only when we are together and we have different opinions and have a debate that we can come up with some innovations. So that's, of course, is kind of a speculation of us that's what we believe, is that if you have two persons with different opinions, then there's innovation. But kind of the idea is how to make city planning and city co-planning a group exercise, a group work. And this is kind of a bit how it's done today. So you get these mood boards, or whatever you want to call them, with 600 post-its. And and it's difficult. This is actually workshop we were doing, like before we had UrbanistAI with the NDP, and it's just so difficult for a person who is not trained an architect or is not trained artist or who has never done any sort of a creativity, kind of a one-on-one course on creativity. It's super difficult to imagine what do I want from the city of the future.
And I assume this is also like a similar drawbacks as the Delphi method, where you sort of, if you run the show, you can basically govern what comes out. And then in the end, you can say, oh, we had citizen participation, even though basically only your ideas are on the board. Is that true? Or?
Exactly, it's true. And not only that, but like the citizens is leaving, so, I mean, citizens as much as stakeholder, it doesn't matter who this, but like the person who participates is giving something, in this case, an idea. But he has no way to evaluate that idea. So I might want to say, okay, I would love if there is bike lane, just because everyone says we must have more bike lanes, fine. But how would it actually look like if there was a bike lane? Like it's so difficult to evaluate if that's a good or bad idea. And the second thing that citizens were also telling us, and they still do sometimes, is that fantastic, you got something from me. What did I get from this process? So from the actual process of co-design, participation, whatever it is that you do, you invite citizens, you get something from them, they get nothing from the process or from you. So that was actually one of the main criticisms that we were seeing in participation, is that, yeah, now you got my idea, what did I get? I go home, I have nothing, right?
What kind of the outcome we could expect, it's like, as I understand, like this kind of meetings, with citizens, when you discuss like what might happen, it's purely, intellectual exercise. Like what kind of thing a person can expect, right?
Yeah, what do they want?
Yeah.
It's conversation with the pleasure.
From my personal experience in sometimes participating in some of the things, it's interesting to talk, and you have a feeling that you influence something, and that is sort of very more.
Before you go on, I had a student who was supremely interested in this, and that one of the interesting things that I learned from him is that these charrettes, or whatever this is called in your case, typically bring together a number of stakeholder groups that usually don't understand each other, but some of them do understand each other more than others. So it's not like architects and citizens. Typically there is governance, there is industry if you're unlucky, and sometimes there is investors who owns the architecture later. Then there's the people who sort of like live in there, like the renters, or the people who buy from the investors, like the bank. And then there is users which have nothing to do with them, which has passed through. And obviously, just by enumerating this, you get different representations. So how do you deal with that? Because like I assume these workshops probably focus on particular stakeholders, right?
Yeah, they do. So they often. Well, I can tell how it was in the past, because now we have a different approach. But like usually, what they do is that you have different workshops for different stakeholders, and usually what kind of happens is that you always have a citizens representative, very small one, or like 20 people, 30 people. Then you have another kind of a groups of investors, stakeholders, shop owners, real estate developers, and so on. And then quite often you have a third layer, which is the kind of a mass participation, which is online. So exactly, you just put kind of a drawing there and you say you like it or not, or kind of where should be the next bike lane, here, there. And for that, maps are great. So if it's just kind of where, that's fine. Usually the kind of the street view is important to know what kind of and how. But yeah, so there is also one of the main issue is that also for those people to speak to each other, it's extremely difficult. So what we wanted to do was actually to start to mix them up. And we found quite a big of resistance from cities, actually. So only in a few cases, we still managed to do it. But with cities like Helsinki and others, they still wanted to keep exactly kind of the stakeholders, the investors. It's one group, citizens is another, and let them work.
Interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, there is still kind of mixing them up, but what they kind of what we started to do, basically, we started to test the idea exactly what do you get. Kind of my feeling was that if the citizens has brought up an idea, that idea should be able to be his idea or her idea. And we started to play before there was AI with artists. So what we would have indeed map-based questionnaires that help, in this case, kids and teenagers to understand what kind of where they want something. So bike lanes or kind of community center, whatever it is. And then we had them choose basically images. So on what you see there, we would just have these kind of big decks of photos of different kinds, like the deck for only photos of mobility modes, like, you know, cars, whatever, pedestrians, bicycles, so on. One for public spaces, one for parks, and so on. And they had to choose their favorites. And then there was an artist drawing by hand those two things together. So if somebody would show, I don't know, like a picture of a kick scooter and a park, then the artist would try to put those things together. So it was like a proof of concept, does this work? And then kind of the drawing would be pairs. And this kind of worked. So, and that's why we thought, okay, then let's move these to the AI. So let's replace the artist with a generative AI model, basically, because you cannot have an artist for each single person. So that's how kind of started. And this was before there was even DALL-E or anything. So that's how we met with Luca, because he was already working on these models. So what we needed to do, we needed to make generative AI model accessible, which, as you know, is quite difficult and expensive. And we need to use these models to harness this collective intelligence. So it means that we needed to work in groups. So we need to have an AI that would help us, that would help people to work together. And eventually build a process that would be actually useful for planners to truly change the city. So that was kind of the challenge. So make a bit cheaper AI, platform that is used by groups, and a process that cities would accept or would use in planning. So this was sort of the overall challenge. And what we also thought is that the power, or kind of the main goal, should be in the actual participatory planning event. Because if you think from a democratic perspective, in a way, citizens have already voted for the representatives. So why would you need participation at all? Like, they already have voted for people who are supposed to take decisions for them on how to design the city, who are supposed to be even more qualified. And it's kind of true. So in a way, the point is that participation, it is a moment actually to build new relationships between different stakeholders and the city. So that's how we envision participatory planning. It's not a way to reinvent democracy or to change democracy, because that's already there. I mean, it's functioning perfectly. You vote, somebody goes there. It's more to, indeed, to have that kind of feeling of ownership of certain part of the process by citizens, and also to establish new relationship, literally like physical, social relationship that happens with these workshops.
I mean, one thing that it sounds nice what you're saying, but it's like there's a thing that governance has limited power, right? So if whoever I vote to be mayor sort of appoints somebody to be the I don't know, the building administration person, who has a pet peeve of like sort of like, you know, one certain types of shrubs, that's not what I voted for.
Yeah.
Right. And so if they have sort of like a relationship with I don't know, the building industry to sort of like develop certain land and whatever. So you know, there may be moments when we could say, okay, the democratic process as it is established does not cover particular aspects, for example, right? And so there must be sort of a way to sort of like engage as a citizen, which again is established because there's the press. You can write an article and opinion piece, an op-ed in the New York Times or whatever. So the question is like, do you map out these kind of things where not only there is like the elected officials, but sort of like what are the different modes of communication that do exist and that you tie into basically?
Yes, and that's why actually we have some co-opted also in the team who works on the policy, because in each city this works in different ways.
Okay, good.
So for instance, in the city of Helsinki, usually kind of participation, it's a must
Mhm.
for projects of a certain size.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the issue. So what we're trying to change actually is that usually this process happens somewhere in between. So the architecture office makes, let's say, some renderings,
Mhm.
and then citizens are called to evaluate them,
Yes.
even though actually citizens are the least prepared to evaluate an architectural drawing. So
Yeah.
what we're trying to do, we're trying to convince cities to do it the other way around, to actually start from citizens' workshops like those and use their ideas as the first input for the architecture offices to make the renderings,
Mhm.
not vice versa. Because then it's so much easier for them to understand what comes out. So kind of what we're seeing from the workshop is that when an architecture office makes drawings based on people's idea, they're able to recognize their ideas into the drawing,
Mhm.
so they're able to evaluate them better.
So if there's 5 different ones, they can say, this is what I meant or something.
Yeah, exactly. So because right now the
Yeah.
architecture office makes, say, 5, 6 drawings based on their ideas. But right now it's more that kind of what we're trying to change is that citizens are not evaluating architectural design, but they're inspiring it.
So as far as I understand, people need to still go to see your AI rendering. Like, let me tell you what I mean. Like in Switzerland, if you want to build something,
Mhm.
you have to put there these famous pillars that sort of give you the shape of the building, and then people
Yeah.
walk by, and there's a certain incubation time where they can complain and say this building is too
Yeah.
large. Or in Dallas, we had a thing where there was a street where there was a participatory action where they wanted to have a bike lane, and somebody had the super smart idea to put a green carpet where the bike lane would be. And then within a couple of days, everybody decided that's not how it should look like. It should be, it's like
Yeah.
20 centimeters to the right or whatever, because, and so, you know, out there, it's 20 centimeters not in the wrong position. There's somebody drew a red bike lane on the sidewalk, which made the whole sidewalk unskateable, for example. And there is 20 centimeters no one can use because it's a pedestrian. If you walk there, the bike's are too close. So they should have pushed it out fully.
Yeah.
And so that is that kind of process that didn't exist. So, but it's a real process. So you walk past the real fake building or the real fake bike lane. And so the question is, these AI models, like how do you create the interaction that people actually sort of like know there?
Yeah. Yes, we can go into that. So there is kind of a different ways.
Mhm.
So exactly that's the issue, is that we are literally developing different methods for each different cities.
Mhm.
Because also citizens are different, processes are different.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we start by building mood boards
Mhm.
that basically inform design guidelines. So what that means, it means that you work with what we call white canvas, which basically, again, citizens they're not trained designers, so they don't have creativity background, so they don't know how to kind of come up with something else than bike lanes and benches.
Mhm.
So there is a process to let them speak to each other, and with architects and designers get inspired
Mhm.
and start to create those so-called mood boards. And this is one example actually from Indonesia, where we're helping UNDP to co-design the future of this Nusantara, which is the new capital city of Indonesia, because Jakarta is sinking and they're building a new. So then exactly how this new city should look like. So there's anyway 2 different processes. One is actually, it can be the whole process or it can be the start of a workshop. But the first one is that we try to help citizens to imagine different futures. And I can show you also later how it actually happens physically.
Mhm.
And the other one is that we have photographs of the area. And then people can select the area they want to transform and put their ideas there, or even use the mobile phone. So they can actually even take a photo and directly do it there. Like you're saying, like instead of having there and building the kind of
Mhm.
mock-up of the volumes,
Mhm.
you actually take a walk, you take a photo, and then you can do that and have a discussion.
Interesting.
And I can show now maybe some examples. So indeed, we're working on these 3 different areas. One which is participatory design, which has its own method, because it means that the city is actually engaging to truly build something.
Mhm.
So it means we need to also include the designers, the constructors, and everyone. Social imagination, it's another method which is more for just just collecting ideas from citizens and letting them feel part of it, express kind of a multiple ideas for the city, and then academy, which is more about academic training and upskilling. So this is more like, okay, we work with different universities to understand how to change the education, like in architecture and planning. Yes.
And how do you, can you go back?
Yeah, sure.
How do you, sort of this slide and the last slide mix? So, I mean, this is all nice, but there is always some kind of like boundaries and limits which are not, you know, social imagination can be quite large if you don't know how much their homeowners association fee goes up if they put that playground was like, you know, you look at that and you've seen something like that before. Okay, that's 60K, my homeowners association thing goes up like 30%, and I'm pretty sure nobody will say yes at that point.
Exactly.
So how do you deal with that? How do you get that kind of information?
I can show some examples from here actually. So maybe then I can go back to those later. But I can go straight to this one of Helsinki. Usually I use it as a last, but now let's do it as a first.
Sorry.
No, it's perfect. It's really good actually. It shows that I should bring this first. But exactly, this is the case where in Helsinki, they basically every summer they turn 3 streets that are for cars into pedestrian streets. And they did kind of a one street, they co-designed it with the old methods, post-its and posters, and the other 2 streets with UrbanistAI. And exactly that was exactly the issue. It's answers here because basically, I don't know, there's no, okay, whatever, but this the woman or the girl or whatever, don't know her age, but dressed in blue.
I mean this.
Yes, that her. So she is representative of the architecture office who has been subcontracted to design the space. Then there is the one next to her with the long black hair. Yes, she's the representative from the city of Helsinki. So she has the money. So one is the design, one is the money. And then the other ones are the citizens. So the idea exactly is that what's been beautiful about this workshop, and that's why it requires a different method than general kind of social imagination, is that here there is a budget, there is a timeline. So the way it went is that the citizens had a constant conversation with representatives. So on each group, there was one representative from the city of Helsinki and one from the architecture office. Exactly, so that somebody would say, oh, I would like to have this thing there. And then they would say, yes, it's possible, but maybe not that because the budget doesn't fit. So it was exactly designed so that people could learn from each other finally. Because usually exactly what happens is that if you just put this rendering online, people say yes or no, based on who knows what.
Yes.
So then on the left, you see how the one group of citizens basically reimagined this one street. And then on the right, how it was built. So exactly, like you can see that the materials might be slightly different, or the design might be slightly different because of budget, but that was discussed within the same meeting. So what you do is that you turn a 6-month process into a 2 hours workshop, because the architecture office gets the ideas from the citizens. They immediately can give the feedback on what's possible and what's not. And then you can literally go straight to the drawing table to make the final drawing. So it was basically kind of 2-phase process. It's kind of imagination at first. Then after 2 months, they showed the sort of final drawing instead of 6 renderings. And then there was basically just 2 rounds of approval. So actually 1 round of co-design, 1 of approval, and the 3rd step is built. So in January, we did the workshop, and then in May, it was built.
And the 2 rounds is inspired by again, sort of the old Delphi problem that if you do 1 round, it will be bullshit.
Yeah, you still need 2 rounds. Yeah, you still need 2 rounds.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to understand. And what is, do we have before picture?
Oh, it's sorry, it's yeah, it's this.
Okay.
Just pause it now. Yeah.
So basically, there is exactly one thing which is, I mean, the buildings are the same.
Yes.
Obviously, nobody changed the buildings. The pavements are essentially also the same. the citizens, and after that it looks like that's two completely different projects, because the citizens suggested to put sort of lots of tables.
But they're down there.
Sorry, the perspective is a bit, because the photo, I took it, but yeah.
It is a completely different set of things, which, for my part,
Yes.
it is maybe better, but anyway, if you sort of filter out all the stuff which is the same before and after, it is not very similar picture.
Not sure about that, because so basically there were different ideas here. So also the bike lane was tested, and what was interesting exactly about this, that like they would say, oh, we want the bike lane. Okay, great, let's put the bike lane here. And then as soon as they see, oh, okay, what about the cobblestone? Cobblestones are gone. No, but that's the historic cobblestone. We want to see it. Okay, so no bike lane. So what's very interesting is that kind of process that it's not visible from the final image. But the reason why you don't see bike lane is because citizens understood that if they put the bike lane, it means putting tarmac on top of the cobblestone. Then some citizens wanted to keep it for cars. They said, we still need to get the cars through. And the others said, are you crazy? It is a pedestrian street. So then how do we make this happen? Okay, then somebody will say, what if we make kind of the pedestrian street becomes an obstacle to the car so that they're still allowed? But if you actually drive with the car there, you don't really feel like driving fast or actually driving.
Yes, so you need to do this sort of
thing.
That's
so you can drive there.
Yes, you can drive. But like, nobody really does, because that's what's beautiful about this kind of design idea, that you go there and you feel like, maybe not really, you take the next turn. So mostly you see the delivery vans for the restaurants there. And then, of course, the third point was that
it's like you turned it into a 19th century street
in a sense, yes. And then the point was that also you see the Savoy, there's the theater, this one. They said, well, we need to make money with the street, so we need to have restaurants. So they say, okay, let's put the restaurant, terrace here. But then the citizens said, okay, but we also want to eat our own food without paying, which was kind of put in this kind of way, which the architects made it a bit better in that sense. So this idea is the non-commodified spot. This is the commodified spot, and there is more commodified spots. So because the point is that each restaurant wanted to.
So basically, I hope restaurants do it themselves. Yes, it should not pay for them.
But the restaurants could demand that there is a counterbalance to people not being able to drive there, so you basically gave them this table space outside for free, or do they have to rent it? Or
this is all built by the city, actually. Okay. So everything, that's why it's not small budget, actually. I mean, it's a small budget maybe for Helsinki, but it's not a small budget even for a street.
A question for you, and actually in some sense also for Xenia, would be like what Mike just said. It doesn't look different. It doesn't look different because you take the same perspective. But one of the interesting things is that the perspective towards.
By the way, I'm completely satisfied.
But the perspective towards house facades completely changed with the introduction of the car, because all houses are typically, or house vedute since the 16th century, are actually looking at the facade from the middle of the street. And so now, as a pedestrian, I can walk down the middle of the street and look at the facade with more comfort, not from the other side of the street. So the question would be, is that true? Do people perceive the city differently? Do they take different pictures, for example, or is there?
Yeah, that would be actually interesting to do, to check the Instagram photos on the street before and after. Actually, I can give you the geolocation of the street. But exactly, that would be something interesting to study if the perception is different, because we know that the use is different. Because there was of course, the city of Helsinki is doing a survey, and it's also bringing back the citizens there to ask, like, are you satisfied? Was this what you wanted in the first workshop? Is this what you actually wanted? Them? Yeah, everyone was happy about it.
And do they remove that after a year, or?
They will remove it, I think, end of this month. So usually it's like from May to September, or until it starts to rain, That's the idea.
And is there streets who have done this previously who say, oh, I want to do it again this summer, or it's like?
Yeah, well, we don't know yet, because exactly they're still there.
The first one.
No, but they've done it last year also. So this is the second year they do it, but they've not done it with this system. So, and it was much, much longer, and there were many, many more meetings. So this was like a test, like if we do it with this method, is it faster, easier, and everybody feels more included. So that was kind of the question, let's say. And I guess the answer has been yes so far. And I can show also maybe if there is. Also, the one thing is that we were printing live. So we had kind of a small Polaroid machine that would print out the images that citizens were making with the AI. And then they went home with them also. So like they could also like that kind of feeling of, this is kind of my idea. Yeah, and then that helped a lot actually. And also the idea that if Helsinki would, okay, it's not the case, but it creates a bit of accountability in the sense that citizens now, they own their ideas. They can bring them home. They can put them on Instagram. So like, if you actually build something very different, you're gonna have citizens coming with their photos actually waking up with something else. So it created kind of thing that you can ignore a post-it, but it's so much more difficult to ignore an image. So I think that creates this kind of establishes different kind of a power game with the city. And this was the other, it's not really a street actually, it's more like a square. But it also shows that indeed the point, it's not to have the citizens design the space, but is to citizens to inform what kind of activities, what kind of ideas they would like to see there. So for instance, again, here you have the bottom left corner. I see, okay, I can do it here. Yeah, the bottom left corner, these are kind of the wish of also of the, again, business owners to have a cafe that would actually be covered so that, you know, there would be, if there is a bit of a drizzle of rain or humidity, it's helping. But of course, then again, how do you fit that in the budget? Maybe you don't. So you have the same, but you can roll it out, like, you know, so you understand the difference between what you generate with AI and the reality, and the budget, of course, as well. And then somebody wanted to have it fully green. So you see, it's kind of two different ideas. Group wanted it fully green. The other one wanted a cafe. Okay, then let's make a cafe with these boxes of greenery. And that's the ability of the architecture office.
And it's the same architecture office.
Yeah, it's still the same. WSP is the architecture office.
Interesting.
And then here again, the ability of the architecture office to come up with a design that was okay. Many citizens wanted to have a space where they could play with kids and even do different things. Like there was this very strong idea to have these inflatable pools, like to let kids be in the water. And some teenagers, especially, they really wanted the space just to sit there, have a picnic.
So this interesting, this whole idea sort of like reminds me of these sort of artificial squares in American cities where they try to turn them pedestrian, like Warren Park in Dallas, which for somebody who's never seen this is like 3 soccer fields where 8 million people try to pretend they're a walkable city, paid by some billionaire. So out of like a Lego chest of things that go into a square. So if we do that, like how many like regular squares will be left that are where people can do whatever they want, where there is no program? Because this is programmed. Yeah, so that is awesome, but it's programmed.
Exactly. Kind of. But what is interesting is that exactly what you're saying is true, because what people wanted in a way here, what you can see from that top right corner, they didn't want a program. They wanted to have a square that they can reprogram themselves.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of, I would say one of the main results of this is that they.
But they did so with program items, which is sort of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess that what is ironic is that kind of this is Finland anyway.
Sorry?
This is Finland.
Okay.
So even freedom is regulated in that sense that like, you know, so even kind of a space where you can do whatever you want, it has to be called a space where whatever you do whatever you want.
Okay.
So and I think that's exactly the point is kind of how do you do this with different cities in different situations. And I guess that's why it's also difficult for us to somehow, like that's why this is not really a product. We're not really selling UrbanistAI. We work with cities to find in which place in their process of designing cities this could be useful for citizens.
Interesting.
So the kind of exactly in this case for Helsinki, coming up with a non-programmed area still have to be programmed. But for instance, now we're doing tests with Tallinn. That seems to be, for example, a bit easier. So there's actually going to be a workshop this week in Kalamaja, where we're starting to try exactly like, what if we just invite citizens not chosen by the city, that they can just do whatever they want. There is no, it's completely out of the planning process, and see what happens. So just let people play with the city, see what comes out. Is it going to steer the politics or not? Like, we have no idea. So we're just going to give these to people. And we do the same in actually another city that we cannot mention yet, but exactly to avoid that there is kind of a, people are kind of prepared, but like we are going to, not in a bad way, but like we just want to make it kind of a surprise. So in a city, there is going to be UrbanistAI public for everyone. So anyone within that cities with their phone can just take a photo and
in wherever position they want.
Yes, wherever they want, anywhere in the city, and just share it again. And that could be actually interesting too, because something we don't do. Maybe we could even think about cooperation, like to analyze then what people have done.
Yeah, that would be super interesting.
Yeah, because we don't have either the time or the capacity, or the client didn't really ask for that, but like it's something we could experiment with.
I find like, how do you like? Let me quote my favorite urban planning sort of report, which is it's a book called Die Besitzergreifung des Rasens, which means the occupation of the lawn, written by the landscape architect whose name I always forget, and Otto Eicher, who was the typographer of the 1972 Olympics. And so their redesign of Munich was, in essence, boils down to, they did a number of things, but this is the most crazy thing. They just removed the little fences in the English garden and along the river that wouldn't allow you to walk onto the lawn. No prescription, like no stakes. People could do whatever they wanted on the lawn. And at some point I asked my mom, I was like, how did that feel? I was like, she was like, in the beginning, people they would take little steps on the lawn because like they were not used to be able to just walk onto the grass. And now people do everything, like literally from making music, having dinner, to making love, everything in different parts of the park. And so that is sort of like, obviously the interesting thing, this is the far end infinity version, where the previous state was the sort of zero version. You're not allowed to do anything and you can do whatever you want. And your process is trying to anneal to find the sweet spot here, right? Is that true? Or?
Yes, because basically, if you would just try in Helsinki, especially to reclaim public space to do something else, well, they would just come with pepper spray. I mean, not really, but kind of. Like, so it's still quite civilized.
Yes.
How public space appropriation is in Helsinki, but still, it's still not something that you can actually really do.
Yes. Okay.
So at least that's the point. Like in different countries, you need to try to reclaim public space through different means. For example, we were seeing in Rotterdam, it was possible to do it a bit more wildly. So there was a lot of placemaking activities. I think it was called something like the 100 plinths. So the 100 kind of spaces where basically a very active champion within the administration started to just basically allow people to repurpose these spaces where there is parking places today. But exactly, if you would do something like this in Helsinki, well, I think most likely either you lose your job or the police comes and remove it. Like, you know what I mean? Like it would just not be happening.
Okay, so people wouldn't do wild stuff.
Yeah, people wouldn't really do wild stuff in Helsinki, and that's what I mean. Like, but in different cities, not only they do, but it's also then kind of, if it's nice, it's even kept. You know what I mean? Like a good graffiti.
Yes.
So I think that is a bit of the issue as planners that we have, is that the overall aim, it's to reclaim public space that it's kind of, that could be used differently, and at the same time establishing a relationship between people so that they would work together on that. And you have to do it differently with every city, and that's why this is not really like a technology company in that sense. But with UrbanistAI, we try to exactly to work either with our partners or with even kind of a civil society group. Now we're trying to work with, for example, with the Finnish theater to exactly understand kind of how do we bring this technology for the kind of placemaking activities that are happening today. So, for example, the theater for Finland, they were interested, for example, in having a sort of a performance in which citizens would be able to reimagine the space and so on. So what I mean is that there is not, and we don't want to have a one method fits all,
Mhm.
because the way you design public space in cities changes completely,
Interesting.
wherever you are. Yeah,
You want to go back to the place?
I think I could go back a bit. Yeah, I think I have. Yeah, again, also this is kind of useful. Maybe that's why we also work with different partners in the method itself.
Mhm.
So, for example, we're working with this National Innovation Center of Aging in UK to understand how to involve kind of let's say citizens of a different age or older age into this program. With humankind, almost the opposite. It's like, how do you have? With them, we're trying to understand how do we open this to the masses. So how do we make this more kind of open? Because as you know, cloud computing, it's like expensive as hell.
Mhm.
So if you would have like 6,000 people connected to this at the same time, you would get a bill from Amazon, which is like quite hefty. So how can we create a series of workshops, or how do we make this public in a way that can be used by more people? But method is the key. Without the method, you don't get anywhere. So we have also got some fundings from this Architectural Council of Europe to develop both a platform, so kind of a design interface, and a method to work with children's.
Mhm.
So also in this case, we tried within the same workshop, we tried different methods to see which one works best. And I think we're going to have now an exhibition opening in Tallinn in 2 weeks at the, I think it's the Museum of Natural History.
Mhm.
So this interface was tested now in Finland, and then it's going to be, I think, for a couple of months running in the museum, where kids can actually reimagine the streets and squares of Tallinn
Mhm.
in a similar manner. So yes, back a bit. Where I can go back, I don't know, there is so much here. But yeah, so I would say the way it looks like, it looks differently also in different applications, but usually you choose a photo, and either you're familiar with prompting, you either put your own prompt, but citizens don't know how to prompt, so you have different ideas that you can test with. And I can show you how this looks like also live later. And City Lab Berlin is doing something quite fun, that they're going to different neighborhoods with that container, and they sort of open it up, and they invite people to reimagine the city also with UrbanistAI. They also have talks, events. So this is exactly a method that it's a bit more on this kind of wild side. So there is no real participatory planning process.
Mhm.
They just say whoever is passing by, just come by and like.
And that's, if that happens within, like, obviously, if this
Yeah.
is part of Republica, then this is also a little bit self-reflectory. So this is sort of like where you present the method in a part of a
Yes.
conference. And so in this case, there's probably no direct outcome.
No.
I'll say this and that neighborhood will be changed.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's more indeed to test the method,
Mhm.
and at the same time also see what people really want actually from
Yeah.
it. And then in Estonia, in Tallinn, we did this just last week actually. So this was with all the stakeholders of this Liivalaia, which is this new street that they want to rebuild or redesign.
Mhm.
And first we did this kind of conceptual work with, okay, which are the concepts, which are the things we would like to see in this area. And they worked mostly on 4 different elements. So this kind of tunnel ideas, street ideas, and then yards. So this is the first part of the workshop. Yeah, it's very visual.
Where can you put a tunnel like this in Liverpool?
Underneath, there is basically right now, there is one crossing. And they were trying to understand, okay, ideally how a tunnel under a street could be like. And the consensus was that it should be something maybe for something beautiful for the youth and so on. So what they do exactly, you first develop in this kind of abstract way, because this is abstract actually, right? I don't have the specific one now here about the tunnel, but then, and then after you develop the abstract concept, you try to put them on the real photos. So this is usually how the workshop work. The first, let's say, half an hour, 1 hour of the workshop, people work on what it is that should be there, right? Is it a bike lane? Is it a park? What is it? And you do that in abstract manner. And when you know what is it, you actually apply that idea to a real photograph. So that's the process usually in the workshops. These kind of 2 steps like this. So here they already decided that the point was to make a green square, you know what I mean? So, but in the previous one, they tried many different approaches. But yeah.
How do you deal with the fact that, like, if you present stuff to people, sort of the involuntary process of gradient descent in the brains of people happens, and then like sort of they get to some kind of local maximum, minimum, whatever, and then they're stuck there because you presented it in a certain way to them. Like how do you how do you randomize basically?
Yeah, that's a really good point actually. So the kind of what we generally do is that well, first of all, we train the moderators. So it means the persons who are running the groups we do it's a kind of a 3-hour sessions to show them also other workshops, learning points, how to run a workshop and so on. But the main thing is that when different groups come up with their ideas and work on their own, then we combine them back together and every group has to show what they've presented. And we literally vote on the best ideas that each group has presented mixed together. So you don't know anymore who has made what. You just end up with this kind of mood board with kind of, I don't know, let's say 50 ideas that come from 5 different groups. But then we as a community, we reflect on those 50.
So that means you have variation solved, but then you got the selection problem, because if you have the mixed thing, maybe the fusion food version of it is not the desirable version.
Exactly. But that's what's interesting is that it's that discussion that makes that emerge.
Okay.
So that's what's exactly beautiful is that it might even happen that of all the 50 things, like when you see all these 50 ideas, you might realize that none of them was actually like the idea that is good for the place.
Okay. So basically you make people go full out pizza capricciosa.
Yes.
And then in the end, they may still end up with a margarita.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's the point is that they learn something. As a single person, as a group.
Okay.
They've learned that actually they all wanted the bike lane, but at the end, better not, because if you put the bike lane, you have to destroy the cobblestone. Like it was the case of Helsinki. Like with a very complex idea, and at the end they went back to just those few wooden boxes and so on. Right. So you might do step backwards, which is good.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think maybe it's kind of enough with the examples. I can just show you maybe how it looks like, but this.
Yeah, sure. Like one question I have is like, how do you find customers? Like, I mean, obviously you work with lots of partners. Like, how do you, like, how much percent is that of your work basically?
Well, it's basically, until now, we have not looked for any customers. So the only one that we looked for was in a way only the first one. It was Helsinki. So the city was our first customer in January. And then it simply snowballed from that. Basically, because of that, they invited us to give a talk. And then in that talk, So like right now, we have not done any sort of active sales, as they call it. So mostly conferences and talks, or like with UNDP, exactly, there was one workshop. And then other UNDP offices, they started to want that kind of workshop. So it just that way.
Because it looks a lot like something you can franchise.
Yeah, exactly. But we started in January. And honestly, like, it's been already kind of too much in the sense that like we didn't even have time to make kind of a sales so far. Like, so we've been mostly also working on the technology that is changing all the time. So even just that, like for Luca, it's been also quite tough because there's new models and new stuff coming every week, not every month. So how do you keep up with that? Also the prompting, before we spend like a month, how do we build the prompts? And then now actually, no, nobody wants to prompt anymore. They just put keywords and there is another AI that makes the prompt. So like, it's like kind of what's interesting with this is that your assumptions of today, they are completely demolished next week, Monday. So you might have a team of persons working on something for like a week. And then on Monday, all that work is kind of in a way old already. So I guess you are having the same issue. Maybe you're working on something and then somebody comes up with full model, like, well, make open source, whatever. So that's that's why we focus so much on the method as well, because that's the only thing that is not going to change. I mean, we're going to improve it week by week, but there is not going to be we're trying to disrupt the way of running the workshop itself. Yeah.
And what's the probability that the workshop itself will go out of business? But that's the one thing it's classic, right?
Yeah, well, actually, the workshop itself is something that there is actually the opposite trend, is that more and more cities are making participatory planning kind of mandatory.
Okay.
So actually, like in that sense, that's why it's kind of increasing right now a bit, I guess. Also, it's because more and more cities, they start to put it as kind of as a law that you must have it. Like in Finland, yeah.
So it's basically like we would end up with the Switzerland situation where people have to participate, basically.
Yeah.
In the kind of like.
Actually, the thing I mentioned is kind of
like if somebody puts something somewhere that people don't like, then you're yourself guilty because you didn't say no, basically.
Yeah. For example, in Helsinki, I think Finland, Sweden, Denmark, it's kind of participation is part of the process. Like you must have it in some form or another.
Interesting.
I think the challenge is how to make it cheap enough for people to buy it. Because, exactly. To run this thing, it's 7.5 kilowatts, something like this.
And so basically, you said like UAI replaces post-its.
Replaces the artists.
Okay, replaces the artists. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, these kind of charrettes use Lego pieces, building blocks, SimCity, whatever. So this has a tradition, right?
Yeah.
So the key thing there is you have design patterns. One of the interesting, Christopher Alexander, whatever comes to mind.
Absolutely.
But then the interesting thing in the AI is like, if you look at things like Stable Diffusion, where there is also some kind of modularity assumption of how an image is constructed. And so this is now a far out question, sort of like to, maybe take the discussion somewhere unexpected. Nature is not coming in modules. Sort of there's often things happening. Like if you look at like, I don't know, the rottenness of Roman facades because the rusty water runs over them, the sort of morbidity of Vienna, the kind of derelictness of Oranienburger Straße in 1991 or whatever. There was a sad beauty in them, which was the absence of this kind of like, okay, here's a Lego piece, here's a Lego piece, here's a Lego piece. So that residual, is that something which, like in some sense, any architectural strategy, if you sort of perform it for long enough, for 50 years, 100 years, whatever, at some point people realize, oh, there's something we're missing. Like, what is that? Like, if you use your method, what is the kind of thing you would like to plug in as a sort of Lego piece that goes beyond that, basically? Is there something you're missing completely and you say, oh, we shouldn't do this at all. People should do capricious buildings and don't ask anybody or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think first of all, my desire would be that the technology would be cheap enough for anyone to arrange their own workshop. Because right now, everything is guided by us in a way.
Okay.
So I think that would be the first kind of the strongest need, is that we'll be able to just let people access this for like €5 a day or whatever. Right now it's like 1,000. So I think that it's going to create so much more wilderness into both the ideation process and also what type of ideation process. Because right now it's kind of in Italian we have this idea, it's kind of per bene, to do things like nice things for the good.
Yeah.
But you might want to use UrbanistAI actually, or any other AI, generative AI, to actually look at how this street would look like if we don't do anything and climate change is gonna flood it every summer, or like. So like you could start to change completely the discourse of participation from let's build a beautiful city to let's see how things can go wrong, or how do we make things go wrong as well. It's like you could start to understand multiple scenarios that have nothing to do with making only a beautiful city, but in understanding on all the other possible scenarios that are not discussed by us, because our role now is to co-design the future of beautiful city. So I would say that would be the number one thing. Would be very interesting just to see, okay, let's give this to everyone for real. Because I say that we give this technology to more people as possible, but we are giving it right now within a framework that is always led by the city. So how participatory planning looks like if it's actually led by citizens, that would be super interesting thing to do. That's something I would like to do. Maybe the EU is giving us a couple of millions to do it. I don't know. So we're going to try to write some horizons or whatever way to open this up. And then the other thing would be to go to place making, so that actually, let's say, there is a discourse and then there's a workshop or whatever it is. But then I think what's really missing is that, I think I have it maybe even here somewhere, that how do we actually co-produce the space, not only co-design it?
Okay.
It's like, because I think like what you're saying also is that kind of a lot of cities, they look the way they look like today, because there has been a kind of a process in which citizens themselves they have transformed the space in a certain way. They have appropriated the space and transformed it. So how do we get there? Because in a way, this process, it's almost hindering that.
Okay, yeah.
If you do participation kind of correctly, you don't really end up with citizens transforming the square.
Or people, because they have participated in the participatory workshop, they won't rip open the cobblestone and plant.
Yeah, or they
Which
will
is
not.
what's happening right now.
Exactly, or they will not go out there and plant a tree where you're not supposed to, or they will not go there and make a graffiti. They will not, like, it's actually, in a way, participation it's hindering that kind of possibilities of people testing their ideas directly on the ground. So if you can test something with AI, maybe you don't test it in the real world.
And then something else doesn't happen, which
Exactly
should be happening.
Exactly. So that would be interesting to kind of, I think that's a bit of the danger of this. The more things you can test virtually, the more scenario you can test virtually, the less you might end up doing in real space, which is not good. Yeah.
You got a question? Go ahead.
No, like, I don't know, like, just conversation went the other direction. I'm very curious, how do you find this citizens group? Like, because, for example, when you show the street, like, I don't know, like, if you ask a group of teenagers, it would be a totally different street, right? It would probably be the cafes, it would be some skate park, I don't know, like, the street. And how do you balance it? Because there are so many different groups in the society and so many different interests. So, how do you compose it?
We actually don't. So usually the cities do. For example, it doesn't matter if it's Helsinki or United Nations Development Program, they usually make the groups. And in Helsinki, actually, in each group, there was, let's say, a teenager, a foreigner, younger people, older people. So Helsinki has done it quite well, actually. Yeah, at least the way they organize the workshop has been quite well done. But for some others, they prefer actually to split those kind of groups and people, and then have the discussion at the end. So you might have the teenagers, you might have the older people, you might have whatever, the investors, 3 different workshops, and then you put it all together, right?
Interesting. So that basically means that your picture of the architect and the crowd is sort of like a bifurcating picture, because whatever subgroup you pick, you still got like a privilege hierarchy going on.
Yes.
Because if you have a teenager in a group of grown-ups, then like, what's the voice of that?
Exactly, and that is reason why, again, like technology here is nothing. Process is everything. Like, right, so like it doesn't matter now if you have an artist drawing it by hand or if you have generative AI drawing it artificially.
Yeah,
you still kind of process is king. It's still who is moderating. Is that person able to moderate a group? Is it able to make everyone speak? And that's what we are trying to do in UrbanistAI. Basically, we're not just selling a license of a software. We are having exactly this kind of 3-hour sessions with these moderators to say, okay, how do you speak to people? How do you let everyone speak in the group? So like, it's pretty much about, let's say, how to run a workshop of this kind. And that's why we need to make it better and better every time. So that's kind of and of course, the main hierarchy is anyway dictated by the city, because they choose who comes to the workshop anyway. So they select. Even now here in Tallinn, there is a workshop next week. We don't get, I mean, we can advise that, okay, like try to invite this and that. At the end of the day, they decide, right? So it's city decides. So we can only show from past experience.
But I was invited, I wasn't able to register, but basically what Tallinn is doing, there's randomly selecting people and sending them a letter and then you can register just to express your interest and participation in this sort of event, discussing the future of Tallinn as a city. And then they again randomly select among the people who fill out their survey. Then they pick, I think, 60 people who will work on the weekend.
So you got an email from the city or something like
Yeah,
that?
I got a letter in
Yeah.
three languages, like in English, Russian, and Estonian. It's very cool.
Yeah, same in Helsinki, they send these mass emails and then from that they make a selection and based on, so that there is every group, every neighborhood is represented. But that's why this system is also much better in a way. Exactly, this, many don't do it because it's more risky, but this open house system, I like it so much more that you just say Thursday at 4, open house, participatory design workshop, and anyone is welcome. The door is open. I think this is really good. So it's just that it's very difficult to find cities that want to do it.
Which depends a little bit of where you are, right? So this is downtown Cleveland, I surmise.
Yeah, this is in Cleveland, yeah.
So if you do that in downtown, I don't know, Irving, Texas, get a bunch of right-wing people that don't want to have diversity. And so the question is like, what do you do there? Is probably something.
Exactly. You need different approach everywhere you go.
Mm.
Like in here in Pristina, just yesterday, actually, the day before yesterday, it was done this way that even like again, you need different approach wherever you go. We didn't even use the UrbanistAI during the workshop because in that social context or in that specific project would not work. So what we did is that we collected the post-its from the previous run and then turned the post-its into prompts to actually generate different ideas. Then all of those things were printed out and then people could then choose like that way.
Okay.
It just wouldn't have worked to have like 60 people that they all want parking place anyway. That was kind of one of the main issues, that when you get citizens together and you ask what do you want, most likely they want better parking place, they want bike lanes, they want just kind of, they think about infrastructure. They don't think creatively as much.
So you need to put in front of them what is a possibility space.
Exactly. So you see, yeah, this kind of these are the same thing that were printed there. So these are all done with the AI. So this is the kind of original image.
Status quo.
Yeah, and these are kind of what if you could grow the vegetables there? What if this would be for children, and so on. There's many. They were kind of 3 different areas that they were mentioning here.
Do you bring in also ideas which are, it seems to be there's like common sense ideas and ideas that come out of the crowd. Like, let me give an example. In Caracas, there was sort of half the population was not counted because they lived in a favela. And it was super dangerous to go there. And basically, if you went to work to the city from that area, you had to walk through the whole favela. So the idea they had is, let's put a cable car there, like basically a chairlift from a ski area. And many people used that, but then there were these stations, and in the stations they had the brilliant idea to make a community center in each case where you could do sports and stuff like that. And that sort of pacified the thing, like, 30 years of policing didn't help, but all of a sudden they had this sort of like common shared space, and all of a sudden the sort of citizens living there were very allergic against violence. Like this kind of thing, like if you look at these squares, you're like, you have a if there's problematic sort of like social problems, you put a playground there. Okay, somebody sits there and sells weed. So how do you actually make the playground that looks like a playground, an actual playground where people do play and not sell weed? So that sort of like kind of thing is sort of something which, how do you, there is certain, longer story very short, there is certain ideas which need to be top down because
Yes.
somebody needs to come up with them, and there's a little bit more complicated. How do you bring them in? Systematically or? Systematically,
actually, yes. So actually, so there's different ways. In this case, exactly, it was that we just print all of those ideas. So we just, even things that they've not imagined. So we have, of course, I'm a planner, we have architects. So we try to study all the time what are the solutions. So we go through this kind of manual of placemaking. Okay, what is the manual of placemaking? So, and we turn these ideas into prompts.
Yes.
So the way it's kind of done usually, I can show just very quickly. Okay, so here So the way it's done is that you basically get oh, it's quite slow on the internet, so but it's fine.
Sorry.
No, it's maybe even me because of me. So you go like this way. So you select kind of, oh no, this is, yeah, you select an image, this one, and here you start to get this kind of idea. Exactly. If you know what you want, or if you want to play, you just write it down.
Okay.
But then the way we introduce these ideas, it's either, depending on the workshop, but if it's with UrbanistAI workshop directly, we put them here. And
how do you select it? Like if I see
yes,
cooling art installation, I mean, but
yes,
it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yes.
Like how do you come up with stuff like that?
So actually we have a list of like almost 1,000 of those.
Yeah.
So these are just a few of them,
Okay.
just to give an impression. But yeah, we basically constantly, we have a guy that is our prompt engineer that is just, you know, spending the day.
I'm not criticizing that.
No, exactly.
There,
yeah, exactly.
But there is places where people like Dubai people say, well, like cooling arts installation seems to be super awesome. Right?
Yeah, actually kind of, so the way it's done is that, of course, we're building it step by step or project by project, but that one comes from a UNDP workshop in which we had to find solutions for kind of when citizens and experts were using UrbanistAI, they only had to see solutions that would help mitigate climate, heat island effects.
Okay.
So what we do, we just open these manuals, heat island effect mitigation, and then we try to get kind of experts' ideas from there.
Oh, interesting. So that also means that your system will get better over time. And so if you, like you've done this sort of climate change mitigation thing, like if you say, you know, you do the forensic architecture version, then basically you can do anti-segregationist planning in places where there is segregation or something like that.
Exactly. And then basically for each city, we change, for example, those so-called guided prompts, because if they want to, if the topic of the workshop is regreening.
Did you say guided prompts?
Guided
prompts.
Guided prompt. If the topic is regreening, we wouldn't show them like an urban canal or a modern oasis. These are clearly done for Dubai. So we show kind of a different starting ideas. And this is done differently for children, of course. So for instance, if I show you for kids, it's done in this kind of way that, okay, let's go forward. Okay, now we have those photos. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So they have this sort of more like activities with even no text. And what they do, they just scroll through them and find something that interests them. And then they can apply to that. So let's say, okay, this kind of thing.
Chocolates and cookies.
Yeah. And then the idea is applied to the urban space in a way. Yeah, I said now it's a bit slow, but it's fine. And this is how we help people to think a bit outside of the box, or vice versa, to make them think within a box. Because if you just get a group of citizens to say, okay, change the street, write it down, it's really difficult. I think even for us would be like if somebody would ask, how would you transform Narvamante? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I lived there for 6 years actually, but I wouldn't really know. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
my personal desire is that the bike lane is 20 centimeters further to the left.
Yeah,
it's smooth. So my knees.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this kind of exactly now that idea of colorful seating area is applied to this kind of street in a way, and then usually what they do is when you tap with the fingers on the iPad, it puts the like. Yeah. And then later the most liked images are discussed, basically.
So that is exactly where like sort of the sort of participatory sort of way
comes in.
The Delphi issue, but also comes in like, you know, all your kids thing had this sort of like bounded rainbow kind of coloration.
Yes.
What if as a kid, like it's like, okay, so I'm totally over my rainbow phase. Everything needs to be Barbie pink or black because it's now. So how do you bring that in? Like, is that not something you can do, or because at some point you have to make an aesthetic decision.
Sure.
And in your kids' version, you made that decision, and so I think that is a big problem, right?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, right? So like we use the workshops themselves to exactly understand. So let's say, for instance, if we see that kids, that's why we've been doing this with kids of different ages to understand which of those images are more attractive to different type of age groups. But we also just have a complete open discussion. So what I mean by open discussion is that we can step out of this guided interface and we just actually go here where we, let's say, get an image in and literally talk. So we actually have a chat, and we did this also with the kids. Say, okay, in your free time, what it is that you do, and then every kid's like, of course, they like to talk, and it's okay, but what is it you would like to do that is not here today? And they were like, oh, I would like that there is more space for sitting, because I didn't know, but it's a strategy actually that in schools there is not really sitting place for kids because they need to burn the energy out.
Okay.
I never thought about it. I was like, because all the kids from the workshop, they always wanted a place to be like this with the phone. And it doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that kind of discussion can happen. They say, okay, where that should be? Okay, it should be maybe there. Okay, good, then let's try there. Right. So like then you have this kind of as if you are with the artist. So you're back to the previous method where it's just a chat, where it's just kind of a human to human interaction. Okay, what do you think then it should be a place for sitting? Okay, so yes, a small modern place for sitting with greenery, whatever. No, just nothing creative. And that's kind of how it goes. So you generate and then you have a discussion. So the power of the technology is not into being able to generate an idea, is in being able to generate the idea fast enough that you can have a discussion about it.
Okay, so we can still talk and while this like sort of loads,
Yeah, usually it's 3 to 5 seconds. Now it's just because of the
yeah, okay.
So this is interesting because so now the one thing you're missing is sort of like the direct connection to the internet of your model, basically, right? So in order to like the thing I'm thinking about right now is Lee Edelcourt sort of giving me 25 photos for $25,000. So I know, oh, next year it will be copper and it will be green on the walls and whatever. These are things that cannot come out of a model because nobody has them in their head. Because Lee Edelcourt is not a trend analyst, she's a trend designer, sort of. And so then the question is like, if something like that comes in, that is really brand new, that is also the moment where you sort of would feed it in if the model would be present aware, basically.
Yes. Yes, and also the interesting things we can do is that since we're not using DALL-E or any of those, we can train the models ourselves.
Okay.
So Luca can actually train the model based on whatever we want.
Okay.
So actually one thing that we would really like to do, but it's again a question of fundings, and we've been applying for this actually, is to have a participation at the level that we even inform kind of a train and tune the model with the citizens. Because
so to train and tune the model with the citizens.
Yes, because the thing that right now it's interesting to me that I see throughout this workshop is that people don't really think about urban space in terms of design elements. That's how architects and planners do. They think through emotions. I want this place to feel safer. I want it to be beautiful at night. If you write that into AI, it's garbage. Like they cannot interpret that. Right. So if I would just say a safer space, whatever, it doesn't know what that is.
It's like,
right?
I know, it's like flag card.
But it doesn't even know what that is in Tallinn versus Helsinki. So that's why it would be very interesting to train the model on concepts of urban space or feelings. Yeah, it's nothing, just makes it empty. That actually are reflecting the specific local cultural bias. Because safe in Rome is a completely different meaning than safe in Helsinki.
What are you talking about?
It's just like, right?
You're able to stare at the car that tries to over you, right? Yeah.
Wow, look at that. So that is kind of that would be that would be the next step that I think we would like to work on. It's to not co-design space, but also to co-train the models. Huh?
Nice. Everybody wears helmets, nice. And that is a security car? Or-
Yeah, yeah, it could be a security car, right?
Also people like more people safer.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
driving garages.
So yeah, a bit of this kind of stuff. And yeah, you can see indeed we have different models. So because some models are trained more on photographs, some more on renderings, so they give different sort of outputs. So that's I mean right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then Luca is bringing in a new one. But and we also started to work with a city to make their own custom model.
Mhm.
So based on images from that cities, but also based on visions, unrealized visions from that city.
Interesting. Okay. There's places where this is more possible than with others. Like if you think about Paris, where everything is a palace facade.
Yeah.
In different style, but good luck with that. And I don't know, some city that is like mixed together from all sorts of stuff. So you can use this different possibilities in different places, right?
Yeah, but what I think what is so interesting also is that if you take Paris, like since you mentioned, cities like Paris, you can only do placemaking mostly. What I mean is that this works indeed. Like this UrbanistAI has been designed in Europe, so we've been thinking so much about how to redesign a street. But you can see that buildings are never touched in a way.
Yeah.
Because you cannot really do, like in most European cities, you cannot touch the buildings.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why, like from, as you can imagine from Middle East, the request is almost the opposite. It's like, how do you imagine something from scratch?
Yeah.
And that's why we started to work basically on this, let's say, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then sort of place like Cleveland would be the in-between situation where basically.
Yeah, well, you're just reimagining small lots. Yeah, so if you take Cleveland, I think that's so good example because they've done so good workshop. So it was really well done, but.
That's something I wanted to point out before. Is like, could you confirm that this is a place where this works particularly well because people are used to the participatory process much more than in Europe?
I think actually it seems that there they were not really used to in Cleveland,
really?
at least, yeah. So for them, it kind of really worked. At least the feedback we got is that it really worked there because people they felt that they have produced those ideas. So we're back to square one, that like they feel the ownership of the ideas and they feel that those ideas they are being published. So like if I'm having a conversation and the end up it's a post-it, you cannot even put that online. But here the conversation literally goes online. So right now the images that were produced, they are there.
And what is this like, judging by the picture, this is places which are more rental than bought and less sort of like not in a good state of economy right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's many empty lots. There is many kind of blank facades.
Yeah.
And the issue is that what happens quite often in cities is that actually it's not so much the economy. Of course, the economy is always the underlying issue of a city, but sometimes there is no futurability of the city. So there is no idea of what could be that could drive the investment.
So no vision based.
No vision. And most of all, no shared vision, because sometimes you might have a vision, but it's this kind of one guy vision. So it's very difficult for other people to buy in. But when you have a vision which is co-produced, it's so much easier to get more people inspired.
Can you go back to the picture of the wall with graffiti on? So one of the key issues is there's no tree on that street, and then your suggestion has trees everywhere, which cost money. So how do you reconcile it? Like American city, there's like a huge correlation with the number of trees and people who actually can afford paying tax.
Yeah, I think it's back to the fact that again, there are resources somewhere.
Okay.
However, to bring back those trees, so if people actually we need to show that people do want the trees. So quite often it's more of a that's why we need these kind of mood boards. That's why we need these kind of images instead of post-its.
Yeah.
Is to then reach out or to try to get the resources to say, hey, look, that actually it's not only beneficial to have trees, but it's also something the community really wants. And it's okay, can you prove that? Yes. Look at outputs of the workshop. So these kind of workshops really are a mean to to also get to those resources that sometimes are needed to transform the urban space. So, of course, trees, you can see it also from here that even though people want to build, even when they want to kind of bring new buildings, they still want trees, exactly because it's missing from their community. And there's many examples also from West Africa where, yeah, it is true, it's a question of money, but it's also a question of organization. With a workshop like this, you can go and argue for the resources. Say, okay, we had 200 people, we had 300 people wanting this. It's documented. You know, it helps a lot. It helps a lot.
One final question I have regarding this.
Yeah, sure.
So if you look at these pictures, so this is, you know, if you look with the eye of like an educated person, then you see to the lower right, this is very, very expensive. You need a garden and flowers, and this costs you, I don't know, a lot per month, right? The others, there is the ones that have trees in. I mean, public desire is one thing, but do these trees even grow in that place, right? So there's this kind of thing where Northeastern America, where there is certain oaks that are grown all the time, and then like 80 years later, they all die, and then you have to plant something else, which in 80 years dies, and then you can plant the oak again. 2 out of 5 trees die, and like, so there's, it's not like that there's a simple process going on, but so that kind of experience, I surmise is rather difficult. Bringing it, like there's one thing that your process is sort of applicable to all over the world, but then that local expertise, I think, is really hard, right?
Yeah, and exactly, that's why we want that there is always a local expert in the groups.
Okay.
So in the workshops, like for instance,
there's an architect, a landscape person.
Yes, exactly. So that's one thing we can also do, and we do, is that if we do a workshop, let's say North Macedonia, and there is a bit more budget than usual, we do actually so that if somebody says a tree, it's going to be only one of the trees that we know grows there. So we can basically, bias the prompt so that if somebody just write a bush, it's going to be a bush of the type that can grow there. If somebody says a bike lane, it's going to be painted in red or in yellow based on which country you are.
Because that's like how they do it.
Yeah, so actually the thing we can also do is that we can train specific objects for a specific workshop. So if we do a workshop in Helsinki, then we bias the AI, we tune the AI with 6,000 images of bike lanes from Helsinki. So that when it's drawing a new one, it's going to be of the style that Helsinki is used to.
And where do you get those images from?
Yeah, we just to get them, or we take photos ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just photographs.
Wow. Okay.
So that's one of the things that we've been doing.
Opportunity.
Make it cultural specific then.
Yeah, but that's the point. Depends on the workshop, because sometimes you want to do exactly the opposite, right? You want to reimagine. Okay, what if this street looks like a Barcelona street? So then you want to have the opposite. You want to have a model that is less, let's say, culturally representative than possible. That's why it's interesting to make a training sets with renderings even from other cities or visions never built, because otherwise you bias too much the AI to reproduce what is already seen. Like then you get with the same street that you already have.
When you want to where you go kind of like a leap and then end up with some more sci-fi things in it, just to for people to explore, open up the way.
Yeah, it's possible already now in a certain manner. So if I write sci-fi, whatever, kind of a post-punk, you kind of understand these kind of things. But indeed, as I mentioned, we are working now with the city to actually make the first model. So we're going to learn also ourselves so much from that, using a lot of renderings and things that don't exist. So we don't really know yet what's going to really happen. But I think it's going to be quite interesting. And that's even possible, even more in this kind of a 3D model version. So Luca is now developed the model that actually works with volumes. Because one of the core issues is that we need the AI to be creative enough, but within certain boundaries. And if you have an existing city, it's sort of easier because you have photographs. So you start from the photo. So the generative AI is always going to do something that more or less fits in that picture. But exactly like, how do you get the AI to really express all its power of creativity is when you have just an empty volume. So basically you can reimagine the volume in all possible ways, steampunk, modern, like then you actually can extend the imagination even further because you don't have any sort of context that is gonna nudge or let's say bias the AI.
So is this something towards the idea that you have some feature you like about it, you keep that feature and then they mix up these other ones and then you choose something you like, and then people end up with something that they really kind of everyone agrees with?
Yes, that's what happens usually in the workshops. This is what you're seeing now. It's more to sort of help people get inspired like themselves. So because again, the biggest gap is you start with an empty thing, and for people it's really impossible to say what to do with it. So then if you start to play, it becomes like a game. Then you get yourself inspired by what could it be like. So that's sort of the.
This just makes me think like Walter Gropius would have loved it, Hans Cerrone would have hated it. And it also reminds a little bit of, do you know McMention Hell?
No.
Website? No. It's a fantastic website where she's an architect analyzing McMansions and like just pointing out sort of like, because it's built the same way, you know, it's like most McMansions have like these details. Like there's a Morin window and the Roman door and whatever.
Yeah.
And she sort of like points out like all the cases where it doesn't work. Which typically there's hundreds in one per se. And so one of the interesting things is like, this thing is super inspirational, super interesting in a sense, while at the same time, because it's so easy, how about the architecture that has this integrated kind of design? Like you know, people like Steve Wozniak or Pininfarina would sort of like fear their job, but nobody will do their job because the AI doesn't get to that point. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, it makes sense. But my feeling is that we're going towards a direction in which Pininfarina would have his own generative model. So I think kind of the place we're heading to is that a design office, a school, a person would kind of have his own model.
Okay.
And
so just like they train their head and sort of like Pininfarina can produce a car that looks Pininfarina out of their head.
Yeah.
They can also have an AI which sort of like provides the style and still.
I think it's almost like a kind of a personalized version of ChatGPT. So like you start to co-design, you start to bring your ideas into life with a generative AI model that it doesn't just generate, but it learns from your feedback, which is the thing that now ChatGPT doesn't do yet. But basically, whenever you write back to ChatGPT, okay, no, this was a bad idea, can you please redo it that way? It actually just generates something new, but doesn't learn from your comment. I think that's what's going to happen is that as soon as the privacy issues are fixed or solved, as soon as there is kind of a law framework to make that happen, ChatGPT, as much as many other tools, will be reinforced by your feedback. And I guess that's why it's going to be personalized. I think that's kind of where we're going to. And I think that's why it would be interesting to make workshops in which you train the AI so that group of people would have their own generative model. I think that's exactly, I think, the direction where it's going to. So yeah, that's kind of my feeling is that every architectural office is they're gonna have their own LLM and they're gonna have their own generative model, and that's what's gonna make them different in the future. Just like they have today. I mean, already today they have their own rendering set with their own color palettes. I mean, what makes different Zaha Hadid from somebody else is also how they present their work. What are their colors? What are the fonts? And now you also gonna have your generative. It's gonna be one of the things that makes you who you are as a designer. I think it's because if you don't, somebody else will anyway. It seems that we are in that kind of level now.
So is this sort of some extension of parametricism in general?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a smarter way of that, because like the parametric design it's also quite often designed to imitate natural shapes or natural kind of parameters.
Uh-huh.
However, in here, I think if we become able to have a conversation with AI, we start to input also our emotions inside as a parameter. So that's my feeling. It's an augmentation of that parametric design that right now it's inspired by geometrical repetition, if you want, or configurations. But with these generative AI models, we might be able to inspire the parametric model by our feelings a bit even more.
Interesting.
That's kind of.
I just try to imagine the Munich Olympic roof look more lederhosen and Dirndl, which is the result of this.
Or it could be that the result is that we don't need this at all, and actually we want to do things by hand.
Okay.
There is still artists today that don't use any digital tools,
Mhm.
and they're still successful. And so, I just think this is a new type of brush that you have, and for some it's useful, for some it's not.
And then the consequence could be to be pure parametricist nature, soap bubble, because that's more perfect than if you would basically sit under a Dirndl or a lederhosen, basically.
Yes.
Which would be, ironically speaking, or polemically speaking, the end result. Like if you make Dubai look like this and Tallinn look like whatever people imagine looks particularly Estonian, then you're reinforcing something which is reinforcing a difference. And
but I think you're also going to reach that kind of threshold where everything becomes so parametric, and so sort of a generative AI based that I think there is going to be, and there is, I think, already now a new appreciation for performance. So actually, the act of design, the act of speaking, the act of doing something, it's going to be revalued as an act of performance. So I think already now I don't see what is the point anymore to write an abstract or something that anyway ChatGPT can do for you. So I see that there is going to be so much more interest in talking to somebody. And I think the same with design. I think it's going to be so much more interesting in the future to, yes, now we co-design with AI, but it's going to be interesting to get back and co-design with people, how that would look like. So I think it's going to make us discover new things into that. That's kind of.
That's a really cool final word for the official part of this conversation. Thank you very much. No, amazing. Thank you very much.
It's 2 hours already.
Yeah, 2 hours. Talk 2 hours. And I'm just taking a break in the official part of the conversation. Please. So people who are think 2 hours is already too long. But I didn't see this coming, but this was actually, if you're ready to if you want to have this online, we can totally put it online because we learned a lot from you and maybe other people want to learn in the future.
Yeah, if it was good enough.
Can you do that?
Yeah, I will do that.
Okay, great. Okay, awesome. This was amazing.
Yeah. Cutting it off.
You just connected parametricism, the new traditional clothing kind of fad with romanticism for me, with artificial intelligence. And that is mind-blowing because the kind of thing is that sometimes you don't know where stuff goes. And historicism, like where you pick, where you say, let make this volume look Arab, make it look Indonesian, make it look Roman, make it look Greek, is a subform of historicism. Combining this with parametricism is obviously then the perfect application for machine learning. And so there's this guy, Rüdiger Safranski, who wrote this book on romanticism, which is, I don't know, there's at the same time a lot of awesomeness in that, but at the same time, it's also the source of, the new chauvinist nationalism reinforced by clothing and stuff like that. So I think that is a really interesting thing where, like any good architecture tool, it can be applied everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. And so the question is, how do we make the best out of it? It's a really big problem.
It is, and it's quite difficult because you need to balance what people want and people need with having something that it's engaging and surprising.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something that actually it's kind of useless, but it's beautiful and it's nice. Because that's what happens with this. You always try to make something that is useful, but then actually the best part of the city sometimes are the one that they have something which is completely meaningless in terms of infrastructure, but it's a piece of art that it becomes symbolic for the whole city. Like, and I think art is a good example indeed. Like art in the city is something that has no meaning as infrastructure. It doesn't help anyone with parking places, but it helps creating the city for what it is from citizen perspective and visitors. So I think that's going to be very hard to balance, because if people start to think that participation has to drive every single design process, it's a huge problem, because you're going to miss the surprises that architects and creative and artists can bring to the city. So I think that's a bit of the issue, I would say, with having too much of this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also the theory that goes into it. You think about, brutalist living quarters, which were depressive for most people.
And now they're like super.
Exactly. There's people who read J.G. Ballard and come up with 1980s wave music, and now it's awesome. Everybody wants to live there. What's happening? Right. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you very much. Cool.
Yes.